He was an orphan with nothing to his name, just a key to a forgotten life. But the land his aunt left him was already stolen, and the culprit was the one person he thought he could trust. If you've ever felt like the world had already decided who you were, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're a community of people who believe in rewriting our own endings. The air in the administrator's office at the Northwood State Home for Boys tasted like stale paper and resignation. It was the same air I'd been breathing for 10 years, but today it felt different, thicker. It was my 18th birthday, the day of my release, the day I was supposed to be free, but all I felt was the familiar cold weight of being utterly alone. Mr. Henderson, a man whose face was a permanent mask of weary patience, slid a cardboard box across his metal desk. The sound it made was a dull, final scrape. "This is it, Leo," he said, his voice flat. "Everything we have on file for you, personal effects." Personal effects. The term was a joke. The box contained a faded photograph of two children squinting in the sun, me and my sister, Maya, before our world fell apart. There were a few crayon drawings I'd made in the first grade, their colors now muted and sad, and at the bottom, a thin manila envelope. I had expected nothing, so this was, technically, more than nothing. Still, it felt like an insult. 18 years of a life, and it all fit into a box I could carry with one hand. "There's a final stipend check," Mr. Henderson continued, sliding a second, smaller envelope toward me. $500. It's not much, but it's a start. There's a list of resources in there, too. Halfway houses, job placement agencies. He trailed off, already looking past me, his mind on the next file, the next boy who would sit in this chair. I was just another piece of paperwork being processed out of the system. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My throat felt tight, a knot of fear and something else, something that might have been anger if I'd had the energy for it. I picked up the larger envelope from the box. It was heavier than it looked. It wasn't from the state. The return address was for a law firm I'd never heard of, Albright and Associates, in a town called Havenwood, a place I couldn't even picture on a map. My name was typed on the front, Leo Vance. Inside there was a single, heavy, old-fashioned key. It was ornate, made of dark, tarnished brass, with a complex, toothy bit that looked like it belonged to a castle door. It felt ancient and important in my palm, a stark contrast to the flimsy institutional keys I was used to. Beneath it was a letter, thick and creamy, folded into thirds. The paper felt expensive. I unfolded it. The letterhead was the same as the envelope. The message was brief, formal. It was addressed to me, care of the Northwood State Home. It informed me that my great-aunt, Clara Vance, had passed away 2 years ago. It stated that she had left me a significant inheritance, the details of which were to be discussed in person. The inheritance, it said, was to be held in trust until my 18th birthday. Today. My breath caught. Aunt Clara. The name was a ghost, a whisper from a life I could barely remember. I had vague, dreamlike images of her, the scent of pine and wood smoke, the feel of a soft, wrinkled hand holding mine, a low, gentle voice humming a song I couldn't recall. She was my mother's sister. After the accident that took my parents, she had taken us in, me and Maya. We lived with her for a year, maybe 2, in a house in the country. It was the only time in my life I remembered feeling safe. Then one day, men in suits came and we were taken away. I never saw her again. The system told us she had surrendered us, that she couldn't handle the burden. I had spent a decade believing I was abandoned, first by my parents who died, and then by the one person who was supposed to save us. The bitterness of that belief had been a shield, the only thing that got me through the lonely nights and the casual cruelty of a life raised by the state. Now, this letter, this key, an inheritance. It didn't make sense. Why would a woman who threw us away leave me anything? Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a signal that my time was up. "Good luck out there, Leo," he said, the words automatic, spoken to 100 boys before me. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I put the letter and the key back in the envelope and shoved it into the pocket of my thin jacket. I picked up the box of my life and the envelope with my $500. I didn't say goodbye. There was no one here to say goodbye to. The other boys were ghosts I passed in the hallway, each of us locked in our own private worlds of survival. Walking out the heavy front doors of Northwood, the cold November air hit me like a physical blow. It was the first time in 10 years I had walked out of a building without needing permission. The sky was a vast, unforgiving gray. Freedom felt less like a release and more like being pushed off a cliff. I had $500, a box of useless memories, and a key to a mystery I didn't understand. My sister Maya had aged out 3 years before me. She'd promised to write, to stay in touch, to come back for me. She never did. Another abandonment, another broken promise. I stood on the cracked pavement, the wind whipping at my face, and clutched the key in my pocket. Its sharp edges dug into my palm. It was the only solid thing in a world that felt like it was dissolving around me. Havenwood. The name echoed in my mind. Maybe, just maybe, the answers I'd stopped looking for were there. It was a stupid, desperate hope, the kind of hope that gets you hurt. But it was the only hope I had. My first decision as a free man was to buy a one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never seen, chasing the ghost of a woman I thought had forgotten me. The bus station was a symphony of desperation. People sleeping on benches, the air thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and cheap coffee. I felt invisible, just another piece of human driftwood. I bought my ticket from a bored-looking clerk, the transaction costing me $48 I couldn't afford to waste. The bus to Havenwood left in an hour. It wasn't a direct route, it was a milk run, a winding path through a dozen forgotten towns. A 12-hour journey into the heart of the state, into the unknown. I found a seat in the corner, my box on my lap like a shield. I pulled out the letter again, rereading the sparse, formal sentences. Significant inheritance. What did that even mean? A few $1,000s? An old car? The key suggested something more, something physical. A house, maybe? The idea was so foreign, so far beyond the scope of my imagination that I couldn't fully grasp it. I had never had a room of my own, let alone a house. My entire existence had been a series of bunk beds and shared spaces, where privacy was a myth and ownership was limited to what you could hide under your mattress. My mind kept circling back to Maya. She was 3 years older, and in the fractured world of our childhood, those 3 years made her my fierce protector. She was the one who fought off bullies, who saved her dessert for me, who whispered stories to me at night when the darkness in the dorm felt like it was going to swallow us whole. When she turned 18 and walked out of Northwood, a part of me went with her. Her last words to me were a promise, whispered through the chain-link fence of the visiting area. "I'll find a way, Leo. I'll come back for you, I swear." The silence that followed was louder than any promise. No letters, no calls. The social workers said they didn't have a forwarding address. She had vanished. The wound of her absence was deeper in some ways than Aunt Clara's. Clara was a faint memory. Maya was the other half of me, and she had left me behind without a second glance. The thought sent a familiar, bitter ache through my chest. Maybe she'd found a better life and didn't want to be dragged down by the brother still trapped in the system. Maybe she was in trouble. I had no way of knowing. The bus groaned to life, its diesel engine rattling the dirty windows. I watched the gray, crumbling cityscape of my entire life slide by. The faceless concrete buildings, the graffiti-scarred walls, the endless rows of identical houses. This was all I had ever known, and I was leaving it behind. The fear I'd been holding at bay began to creep in, cold and sharp. What if this was a mistake? A wild goose chase? What if I got to Havenwood and found out it was all a misunderstanding, a clerical error? I'd be stranded alone with less than $400 to my name. But what was the alternative? Stay here, get a minimum wage job washing dishes, live in a roach-infested room, and wait for the world to grind me down? The system had a path for boys like me, and it was a short, straight line to nowhere. This key, this letter, they represented a different path, a chance, and I had to take it. As the city finally gave way to suburbs and then to farmland, I leaned my head against the vibrating window and let my eyes drift shut. I tried to conjure a clearer image of Aunt Clara's house. I remembered a porch swing, the taste of fresh-baked bread, a huge, sprawling tree in the backyard that I used to climb. Were those real memories or just fantasies I'd constructed over the years to fill the void? It was hard to tell. My past was a blur, a collection of broken pieces. Maybe going to Havenwood was about more than an inheritance. Maybe it was about finding out who I really was. Hours bled into one another. The landscape outside transformed. The flat fields rose into rolling hills, then into dense forests of pine and fir. The towns we passed through got smaller, the buildings older. This was a different world, quieter and slower than the one I knew. Night fell, and the world outside became a black mirror reflecting my own tired, pale face. I dozed off, my dreams a jumble of institutional hallways and sun-dappled forests. I woke with a jolt as the bus hissed to a stop. The driver's voice crackled over the intercom. "Havenwood, last stop." I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving me in a profound silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. I stood in front of a small, closed-down depot. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. Across the street, a single streetlight illuminated the town's main street. It looked like a movie set. Old brick buildings, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store with a wooden porch. It was almost midnight. Everything was closed. I found a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with a buzzing sign and peeling paint. The night clerk, a stooped old man, barely looked at me as he took my cash for one night. My room was small and clean enough. The floral bedspread was thin, the air musty, but it was mine. For the night, at least. I locked the door, a simple act that felt revolutionary. I didn't have to worry about anyone coming in, anyone watching me. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and took out the key. In the dim lamplight, it seemed to glow with a life of its own. Tomorrow, I would go to that law office. Tomorrow, I would get some answers. For the first time, a sliver of genuine hope pierced through the fog of my apprehension. It was terrifying. The next morning, I walked to the law office of Albright and Associates. It was just as I'd imagined, a modest, two-story brick building nestled between a bakery and an antique shop. The smell of fresh bread hung in the air, a scent that stirred a faint, pleasant memory. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy oak door. A small bell chimed. The woman who greeted me was not what I expected. I'd pictured a stuffy old man, but Ms. Eleanor Albright was in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring presence. She wore a simple gray suit, and her hair was tied back in a neat bun. She looked at me, and I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. "You must be Leo Vance," she said, her voice warm. "I've been expecting you. Please come in." She led me back to her office. It was filled with books, the walls lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. It was cozy, not intimidating. She gestured for me to sit in one of the comfortable leather chairs opposite her large wooden desk. I sat down, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. I'm sorry for the formal nature of the letter, she began, folding her hands on the desk. Your aunt's instructions were very specific. She wanted the trust to remain sealed until you were of legal age, and for you to be contacted directly without the state home as an intermediary. I just nodded, unsure what to say. Your Aunt Clara was a remarkable woman, she continued, a fond, sad smile touching her lips. I was her lawyer for over 20 years, and her friend. She spoke of you and your sister often. She loved you both very much. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She loved you. The system had taught me she hadn't. The story I had told myself for a decade was that she had discarded us. I felt a confusing mix of anger and relief. She left me something, I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding small and foreign. She did, Ms. Albright confirmed. She opened a thick file on her desk. Clara left you her entire estate, the house, its contents, and the land it sits on, 400 acres of forested hillside, about 10 miles outside of town. 400 acres. The number was abstract, meaningless. I couldn't comprehend it. It was like being told I'd inherited a planet. My mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible scale of it. A home, land, a life. It was everything I'd never dared to dream of. But then I saw the look on her face. The warm expression had been replaced by one of professional concern. My brief, dizzying moment of hope began to curdle. However, she said, her voice now carefully neutral, we have a significant problem. She turned the file around and pushed it toward me. It was open to a legal document. A quitclaim deed. My eyes scanned the dense, formal language. I saw the property description, the legal markers, and then I saw the names. The grantor was listed as Maya Vance, sole surviving heir of Clara Vance. The grantee was a company called Apex Development Group. The document was dated 6 months ago. I don't understand, I whispered, though I was afraid I did. 6 months ago, your sister came to this town, Ms. Albright explained gently. She presented herself as your aunt's only living relative. She initiated probate and, as the supposed sole heir, took possession of the estate. She then sold it immediately to this developer. The heir left my lungs, sold it. Maya, my sister, she had found our inheritance, our sanctuary, and she had sold it. The betrayal was so immense, so absolute, it felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. All those years I had wondered where she was, what had happened to her. This was the answer. She hadn't forgotten me. She had erased me. But how? I asked, my voice cracking. I'm alive. She couldn't have been the sole heir. Ms. Albright's expression grew even more grim. She slid another document out from under the deed. It was a photocopy of a death certificate. It was from a county I'd never heard of, dated 2 years prior. The name on the certificate made my blood run cold. Leo Vance. I stared at my own name, officially, legally, declared dead. Maya hadn't just sold our inheritance. She had killed me to do it. The silence in the office was absolute. I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart, a drumbeat of disbelief and horror. I looked from the forged death certificate to Ms. Albright's sympathetic face. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Maya, my protector, the girl who had promised to come back for me, had declared me dead and sold our only chance at a real life to a faceless corporation. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Apex Development is a very aggressive firm, Ms. Albright said, her voice pulling me back from the edge. They specialize in buying up large tracts of rural land for luxury resorts and golf courses. They are not going to give this property up without a fight, a very long and very expensive fight. So what does that mean? I asked, the words hollow. Is it gone? Is there nothing I can do? Legally, you are the rightful heir, she explained, her tone methodical. trying to ground me in facts. The transfer was based on fraud. We can challenge it, but it will require proving the death certificate is a forgery, proving your identity, and proving Maya acted with fraudulent intent. Apex will counter that they are a bona fide purchaser, that they bought the property in good faith. They have a team of high-priced lawyers. They will try to bury us in motions and legal fees, hoping we'll run out of money and give up. Money. I thought of the $350 I had left in the world. It was a joke. I couldn't afford a single hour of her time, let alone a protracted legal battle against a major corporation. The hope that had flickered to life just minutes before was extinguished, crushed under the weight of this new, impossible reality. It was over before it even began. "I don't have any money," I said, the admission tasting like ash. "I have nothing." I expected her to close the file, to offer a final, pitying apology. Instead, she just watched me, her gaze steady. "Your aunt knew this might happen," she said quietly. "Not this specifically, not the part about your sister, but she worried about the land. She knew people would want it. She was a very deliberate woman, Leo. She planned for contingencies." She stood and walked over to a large safe in the corner of her office. After a moment of turning the dial, the heavy door swung open. She reached inside and pulled out a sturdy, shoebox-sized wooden box, bound with a simple leather strap. It looked old. "Clara left this for you," she said, placing it on the desk between us. Her instructions were that it was not to be given to anyone but you in person, on or after your 18th birthday. Not to the state, not to a guardian, and not, she added with emphasis, to your sister. She must have had her reasons. I stared at the box. It was the only thing in the world that was truly mine. A final message from a woman I was beginning to realize I had never known at all. It felt impossibly heavy. "Take this with you," Ms. Albright said. "Go through it. See what's there. Don't make any decisions until you know everything your aunt wanted you to know." "As for my fees," she paused, "Clara set aside a small fund to cover initial legal consultations for her estate. We can talk for now. We'll worry about the rest later." I left her office in a daze, carrying the wooden box. The bright morning sun seemed harsh and mocking. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery now made me feel sick. I walked back to my bleak motel room, the box held tightly in my arms. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and sat on the floor, my back against the wall. For a long time, I just looked at it. This box was a ghost, a tangible piece of a past that had just been rewritten in the most brutal way imaginable. Part of me was terrified to open it. What other truths was I not prepared for? But I had to know. My whole life, others had written my story. The state, Mr. Henderson, and now Maya. This box felt like my one chance to read the original text. With trembling fingers, I unbuckled the leather strap. The wood was smooth and cool beneath my hands. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a stack of journals bound in worn leather. On top of them was a collection of faded photographs tied with a ribbon, and underneath it all, a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in a looping, elegant script that I recognized from the letterhead. It was my aunt's handwriting. I picked up the photographs first. There were pictures of my mom and dad, young and smiling. Pictures of me and Maya as toddlers playing in a field of wildflowers, and pictures of Aunt Clara, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, often with one of us on her lap. Seeing them, seeing the proof of a time when we were a family, happy and whole, broke something open inside me. A deep, shuddering sob escaped my chest. I hadn't cried in years. The Northwood State home burns the tears out of you. But now, alone in this sterile room, I cried. I cried for the parents I never knew, for the aunt I'd misunderstood, for the sister I had lost, and for the boy who had been forced to grow up believing he was unloved and unwanted. After the tears subsided, a hollow emptiness remained. I picked up the sealed envelope. My hands were shaking again. This was it. The answers were here. I broke the wax seal and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers covered in that same elegant handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then it means you are 18 and you have come home. It also means that I am gone. I am so sorry, my boy, that I could not be there to give this to you myself. There is so much I need to explain, so much you deserve to know. The story you were told about why you and Maya were placed in state care was a lie. It was a necessary lie, one that broke my heart to tell, but it was the only way I knew how to keep you safe." My eyes scanned the page, my heart pounding with each word. She went on to explain the truth about my parents' death. It wasn't a simple car accident. My father, a good man with a weakness for bad business deals, had fallen into debt with some very dangerous people. They were involved in illegal lending, the kind of men who didn't accept apologies or payment plans. The car crash wasn't an accident, it was a warning, and the warning was meant for Clara too. "They came to the house after the funeral," she wrote. "They told me your father's debt was now mine. They made it clear what would happen if I didn't pay. They looked at you and Maya playing on the floor and they smiled. It was the coldest smile I have ever seen. I knew then that I couldn't protect you here. As long as you were with me, you would be leverage. You would be targets." She wrote about her agonizing decision. She couldn't run. They would find her. She couldn't go to the police. These men had connections. So she did the only thing she could think of to make them lose interest, to make you disappear. She surrendered you to the state. She created a story of being an overwhelmed, incapable guardian. She let the world and you believe that she was weak, that she had abandoned you. It was a form of camouflage. By becoming a pariah, she made you orphans of the state, anonymous, lost in the system, and, she hoped, safe. "Every day for the past 10 years has been a torment," the letter continued. "Knowing what you must think of me, knowing the life you were living. I followed you from a distance through social workers I paid for information. I made sure you were never separated. I knew when you were sick, when you got into fights, when you won an award for a drawing in the 3rd grade. I have every one of them. I was a ghost in your life, Leo, and it was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. This land, this home, it was all I had to hold on to. The promise that one day I could give it back to you, that I could give you a place to finally be safe, a place to heal." I had to stop reading. The words were blurring through a fresh wave of tears. It wasn't abandonment, it was a sacrifice, a terrible, gut-wrenching, brutal act of love. My entire identity, the hard shell of bitterness I had built around myself, was based on a lie. She hadn't thrown me away. She had cut off a piece of her own soul to save me. The weight of that love, a love I had never known existed, was crushing. And then came the rage. It was a pure, white-hot fury directed at my sister. How could Maya not have known this? Or if she did, how could she have spat on that sacrifice? How could she sell the very sanctuary that our aunt had protected for us at such a personal cost? The betrayal felt 1,000 times deeper now. She hadn't just sold some land. She had sold our mother's memory, our father's grave, our aunt's heart. She had sold our entire history for cash. I sat there on the floor of that cheap motel room, caught between a grief that was a decade old and a rage that was brand new. I was at a crossroads, a complete and total dead end. I could take what little money I had left, get on a bus, and disappear. I could try to forget Havenwood, forget Aunt Clara, and forget the sister who had murdered me on paper. It was the easy path. The path of survival I had learned so well at Northwood. Just keep your head down, don't make waves and disappear into the cracks. Or I could stay, I could fight. I could stand up for the woman who had sacrificed everything for me. I could fight for this land, this home, this one tangible piece of my family's love. But to do that meant facing a giant corporation with no money, no allies, and a past that was a tangled mess of lies and forgeries. It felt like standing at the bottom of a mountain and being told to climb it with my bare hands. It seemed impossible, utterly and completely impossible. Have you ever had a moment where the entire story of your life was turned upside down? When you realized that what you thought was abandonment was actually a painful act of love? It's a strange, hollow feeling, isn't it? Like you're a stranger in your own skin. For years, my anger at being left behind was the engine that kept me going. It was a shield. And in a single afternoon, that shield was gone, replaced by a truth so much more painful and beautiful than I could have imagined. If you're here, listening to this, maybe you know what that's like. Maybe you've had to rewrite your own past. This is for you. Thanks for sticking with me. It means more than you know. Now, let's get back to what else was in that box. After the storm of emotion passed, I felt strangely calm. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. To walk away now would be the real abandonment. It would be a betrayal of my aunt's memory. I might lose. In fact, I would probably lose. But I had to try. For her. My hands went back to the wooden box, my fingers searching its contents more carefully this time. I lifted out the journals. They were filled with her daily thoughts, her fears, her hopes for us. It was a painful, intimate record of her lonely life. Tucked inside the cover of the last journal, I found something else. A small, flat envelope, much thinner than the first one. It wasn't sealed. I slid out the contents. There were 2 items. The first was another legal document. It was a deed, properly registered with the county clerk's office, but it wasn't for the 400-acre property. It was for a much smaller parcel, a single acre of land. I looked at the property description, a complex set of coordinates and boundaries. It described a perfect square located, from what I could tell, right in the dead center of the larger property. The deed was registered not in her name, but in the name of a trust, the Havenwood Spring Trust. The sole beneficiary of the trust was listed as Leo Vance, to be transferred upon his 18th birthday. The second item in the envelope was another key. This one was smaller and simpler than the first. It was a modern key, like one for a padlock. Attached to it was a small brass tag, and stamped into the metal was a single word, heart. I didn't understand. Why would she leave me 1 acre separately? What was the point? I picked up her letter again, my eyes searching for a clue. The main letter ended where I had stopped reading, but as I gathered the pages, I saw there was one more, tucked in at the back, almost like a postscript. P.S. It read, Leo, I have a feeling you will make the right choice. You have a good heart, like your mother. But a good heart is not always enough in this world. You also need to be clever. The world is full of men who see a place like this and only see money. They will try to take it. They will use lawyers and loopholes, and they will try to wear you down. I could not leave you money, as it would have been traced and put you in danger. So I left you something better. I left you leverage. My eyes widened. That 1 acre plot of land I left you in the trust is the most important part of the whole property, the letter went on. On that single acre sits the freshwater spring, the only source of clean water for miles. The farmhouse well is fed by it. The creek that runs through the southern pasture originates from it. Without control of that spring, the other 399 acres are nearly worthless for any major development. They can't build a resort, they can't build a golf course, they can't even build a subdivision without access to that water. They can own the land, but they can't own the water. The heart of this place will always be yours, Leo, if you're strong enough to claim it. The key is for the gate to the spring's enclosure. Go there. See it for yourself. It is the heart of your home. A slow, incredulous smile spread across my face. It was brilliant, a failsafe, a poison pill. My aunt, the quiet, gentle woman from my memories, had been a strategic genius. She had outmaneuvered them all from beyond the grave. Maya could sell the land, Apex could buy the land, but they couldn't touch its heart, and the heart belonged to me. This changed everything. I wasn't a powerless orphan anymore, fighting a hopeless battle. I had leverage, real leverage. I had the one thing they needed, the one thing they couldn't get without me. A surge of adrenaline, of pure, unadulterated hope flooded through me. I finally had a weapon. The next morning, I was at Ms. Albright's office before she had even turned on the lights. I laid the second deed and the small key on her desk. I watched her read it, her professional composure slowly giving way to a look of utter astonishment. She read it a second time, then a third. She looked up at me, a flicker of something new in her eyes. Respect. Your aunt, she said, her voice filled with awe, was the smartest, toughest woman I have ever known. This is a masterpiece. So it's real leverage? I asked, needing to hear her confirm it. Leverage, she laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. Leo, this isn't just leverage. This is a checkmate. Apex Development has a 399-acre tract of semi-arid, undevelopable land. They can't do a thing with it. They are going to be furious. For the first time since I'd arrived in Havenwood, I felt powerful. The fear and uncertainty were still there, but now they were overshadowed by a fierce, burning determination. I was no longer just defending a memory. I was taking back my future. What's our next move? I asked, the words feeling good, feeling strong. Ms. Albright leaned back in her chair, a strategic glint in her eye. Our next move, she said, is to make a phone call. And then we are going to take a drive. I think it's time you saw your home. The phone call was everything I could have hoped for. Ms. Albright was polite, professional, and utterly ruthless. She informed Apex's legal counsel of the existence of the Havenwood Spring Trust and my ownership of the vital 1-acre parcel. She informed them that any attempt to access the spring would be met with trespassing charges. She informed them of the fraudulent nature of the original sale, including the forged death certificate, and gently hinted at the potential for a massive lawsuit that would not only cost them the property, but would also generate the kind of publicity a luxury brand like theirs would despise. The blustering and threats on the other end of the line were immediate, but Ms. Albright calmly weathered the storm. By the end of the call, the tone had shifted from arrogance to panicked negotiation. They wanted to buy the 1-acre plot. They offered a generous sum. Ms. Albright, on my instruction, politely refused. They offered double. She refused. Again, she ended the call by stating that my client was currently evaluating all his options and would be in touch. They'll call back, she said, hanging up the phone with a satisfied smile. They have no choice. Now let's go see the land you're fighting for. She drove an old, sturdy pickup truck that seemed perfectly at home on the winding country roads outside of Havenwood. As we left the small town behind, the trees grew thicker, the hills steeper. The air coming through the open windows was crisp and clean. After about 20 minutes, she turned off the paved road onto a long gravel driveway, so overgrown with weeds that it was barely visible. A rusty, dilapidated metal gate blocked the entrance. A faded, hand-painted sign hung crookedly from it. Vance property, no trespassing. This is it, she said, putting the truck in park. I got out and walked to the gate. It was chained shut with a heavy modern lock. Apex's, no doubt. But next to it, set into an old stone pillar, was a smaller pedestrian gate, also chained. This lock was older, weathered. It looked like it matched the small key in my pocket. My heart key, it fit perfectly. With a turn and a click, the lock sprang open. I pushed the small gate open. The screech of its rusty hinges sounded like a cry of welcome. I stepped through, and for the first time in my life, I was standing on my own land, my own home. The feeling was indescribable. It was a deep, resonant hum that seemed to rise from the soil itself, a sense of belonging so profound it made my knees weak. We left the truck and started walking up the long drive. The land was wild, untamed. Towering pine trees, ancient oaks, a thick undergrowth of ferns and bushes. It wasn't manicured or pretty in the traditional sense. It was rugged and beautiful and alive. I could hear birds calling, the rustle of unseen animals in the woods. It was a world away from the concrete and asphalt I knew. After a 10-minute walk, the trees cleared and we came into a large, open meadow. And there, at the top of a gentle rise, was the farmhouse. It was a simple 2-story wooden structure, its paint peeled and faded to a pale gray. The roof of the porch sagged on one side, and several windows were boarded up. It looked neglected, forgotten, sad, but it was also sturdy. It had good bones. It had endured, like my aunt, like me. "It needs work," Ms. Albright said, stating the obvious. "It's perfect," I breathed. I walked up the creaking porch steps. The front door was solid oak, its surface weathered by decades of sun and snow. I pulled out the first key, the heavy, ornate one that had been in the box from the state. The key Mr. Henderson had called a personal effect. It slid into the lock as if it had been waiting. With a heavy, satisfying clunk, the lock turned. I pushed the door open. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me. The inside was dark, the windows covered in dust and grime. But as my eyes adjusted, I could see the outlines of furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts in the gloom. A stone fireplace stood against one wall. A wide wooden staircase led to the second floor. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light that pierced through a crack in one of the boarded-up windows. It wasn't just a house. It was a time capsule. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I could feel the history here, the lives that had been lived within these walls. I ran a hand along the dusty mantle of the fireplace. This was where my aunt had lived her solitary life, holding onto this place for me. This was where my parents had brought me home from the hospital. This was where Maya and I had played as children. The faint memories I'd held onto for so long suddenly clicked into place. I remembered sliding down that banister. I remembered curling up in front of that fireplace on a cold night. I was home. After exploring the house, we walked back out into the bright sunlight. "The spring," I said. "I want to see the spring." We followed a faint, overgrown path that led from the back of the house deeper into the woods. After another 10 minutes, we came to a clearing. In the center was a square enclosure, fenced off with sturdy wire and wooden posts. A small locked gate stood in the middle. This lock, too, matched the key with the heart tag. I opened it and stepped inside. The air was cooler here, the ground soft with moss. In the center of the enclosure was a small pool of water, bubbling up from between a cluster of smooth, gray stones. The water was so clear I could see every pebble on the bottom. It trickled over the edge of the stones and formed a tiny stream that wound its way out of the clearing and down the hill. It was beautiful, simple, quiet, and perfect, the heart of the land. I knelt down and dipped my hand into the water. It was icy cold and pure. I cupped my hands and took a drink. It was the best water I had ever tasted. This was my leverage. This was my power. This small, quiet pool of bubbling water was my inheritance, and I would not sell it, not for any price. The calls from Apex Development became more frequent, more desperate. Their offers climbed to dizzying heights. First, they offered $100,000 for the 1-acre plot, then $250,000, then $500,000. It was life-changing money, more than I could have ever imagined possessing. The temptation was real. I could take that money, buy a small house somewhere, go to college, build a life of comfort and security. I could walk away from the pain, from the fight, from Maya. But every time the offer came in, I would think of my aunt's letter. I would picture her face from the photographs. I would remember the feel of the cold, clean water from the spring, and I would tell Ms. Albright to refuse. This wasn't about money. It was about justice. It was about home. Then, one rainy afternoon, Ms. Albright called me. Her voice was different. "Leo," she said, "you should come to the office. There's been a development." When I arrived, she wasn't alone. A young woman was sitting in one of the leather chairs, her back to me. She was hunched over, her shoulders shaking. As I stepped into the room, she looked up. It was Maya. I stopped dead in my tracks. She looked older, harder. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her face was thin and pale. But it was her, my sister. She flinched when she saw me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. "Leo," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. I couldn't speak. The fury I had been carrying for weeks rose up in me, hot and choking. This was the person who had declared me dead, the person who had sold our birthright. I wanted to scream at her, to demand an explanation, to hurt her the way she had hurt me. "Apex contacted her," Ms. Albright said, breaking the tense silence. "They told her their original deal was void because of her fraud. They threatened to sue her, to have her charged with a litany of crimes unless she could convince you to sell the spring. They put the squeeze on her." Maya started to cry, deep, ragged sobs. "I'm so sorry, Leo," she choked out. "I didn't know what else to do. I was in so much trouble." She started talking, the words spilling out in a desperate, tangled rush. It turned out our father's past had a longer shadow than even Aunt Clara had known. The men he owed money to hadn't forgotten. After Maya aged out of the system with no resources and no support, she had been easy to find. They found her working a dead-end job, drowning in debt. And they told her the family debt was now hers. They pressured her, they threatened her. They were the ones who had the fake death certificate made. They told her it was the only way. They said I had died in a foster home fire years ago. They showed her the paper, and in her desperation, she believed them, or she chose to believe them. "They took almost all the money from the sale," she sobbed. "I only got enough to pay off some of my own debts and run. I was going to disappear. I thought you were gone, Leo. I swear I thought you were gone." I looked at her, my sister, and I didn't know what to feel. Was she a monster, or was she just another victim, just as lost and broken as I was? She had made a terrible choice, a monstrous choice, but she had made it with a gun to her head, figuratively speaking. She had been trapped by the same ghosts that had haunted our family for a generation. This was my final, most difficult choice. It wasn't about land or money anymore. It was about family. It was about what I was willing to forgive. Apex's final offer was on the table. They would pay $1 million for the 1-acre spring property, and they would drop all legal threats against Maya. All I had to do was sign. I could be rich, and my sister could be free. We could both walk away and start over separately, or I could refuse. I could use my leverage, not for money, but to get everything back. To restore what had been stolen, it would mean turning down a fortune. It would mean accepting that my sister, the person who had so profoundly betrayed me, was still my sister. It would mean choosing a difficult, uncertain future over a simple, wealthy one. I looked at Maya, crying in the chair. I saw the scared little girl she used to be, the one who held my hand in the dark. I saw the terrified young woman who had been backed into an impossible corner, and I saw my family, the only family I had left. "I'm not selling the spring," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Both Maya and Ms. Albright looked at me in shock. "But Leo," Maya stammered, "they'll come after me. You don't understand." "I'm not selling," I repeated, looking directly at Ms. Albright. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to call Apex. You're going to tell them the offer is rejected, but you will offer them a deal. We won't sue them for their role in the fraudulent transfer. We won't go to the press about how they were complicit in a scheme involving a forged death certificate. In exchange, they will nullify the sale completely. They will sign the 399 acres back over to me, the rightful heir. They walk away, we walk away. The property is made whole again." Ms. Albright stared at me for a long moment. Then a slow, proud smile spread across her face. "I think that's an excellent plan," she said. The fight was over. Faced with the choice between losing a bad investment and facing a public, embarrassing, and potentially criminal lawsuit, Apex folded. The paperwork was drawn up. The original sale was voided. The land was mine, all of it. The resolution wasn't a fairy tale. I didn't magically become a millionaire. In fact, I was broker than ever. The legal fund Aunt Clara had set up was gone, and I owed Ms. Albright for the final proceedings, a debt she graciously allowed me to pay off in small, uncertain installments. The farmhouse was a wreck, needing a new roof, new plumbing, and 100 other repairs I had no idea how to perform and no money to pay for. It was daunting, it was overwhelming, and Maya, our relationship was not magically healed. Forgiveness is not a switch you can flip. It's a slow, painful process. She stayed. She had nowhere else to go. We lived in the old farmhouse together, two ghosts rattling around in a house full of memories. Some days were silent and tense, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the air between us. Other days we'd find ourselves talking, sharing a small memory from our childhood, and a tiny crack of light would appear in the wall between us. We were rebuilding, splinter by splinter. I got a job at the local hardware store in Havenwood. The owner, a gruff old man named George, took a liking to me. He taught me about roofing and wiring and how to fix a leaky pipe. The people in town were wary at first, but slowly they began to accept me. The baker would save me day-old bread. The librarian would recommend books on sustainable farming. I was becoming part of the community, putting down roots in the soil my aunt had saved for me. I spent my evenings and weekends working on the land. I cleared brush, mended fences, and started a small vegetable garden. The physical labor was healing. With every weed I pulled, every nail I hammered, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the property, but myself. I was building a future with my own two hands. One evening, I was sitting on the porch swing, one of the first things I'd repaired, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Maya came out and sat beside me, the first time she had done so without being asked. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Yeah," I said. "It is." We sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind, not the tense kind. "Thank you, Leo," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. For not giving up on me." "Aunt Clara didn't give up on us," I replied, looking out at the vast expanse of trees and hills that was our home. "I figured that's the real inheritance she left us, a second chance." Inheritance. I used to think it was about money, about property, but I was wrong. My aunt's true legacy wasn't the 400 acres. It was the choice she gave me. The choice to fight for my past, to define my future, and to learn that home isn't just a place you are given. Sometimes it's a place you have to build from the ruins, a place you have to forgive into existence. The scars were still there on the land and on us, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly, completely home. Home isn't always a place you're given. Sometimes it's a place you have to fight for, a place you have to build from the ground up. If you've ever felt lost or like your story was written by someone else, know that you have the power to pick up the pen and write your own ending. It might not be easy, but it will be yours. What does home mean to you? Have you ever had to fight for your own second chance? Share your story in the comments below. This is a community for people who are rebuilding, and your voice matters here. Subscribe for more stories about finding your way back, and remember, you're not alone in this.